Welcome to the session on creating a line of argument for Year 10 and the study of question 5 on paper 2. This session could be applicable to Year 11 as well, so the same skills are being taught obviously. But the session will run through the mark scheme for this question, a couple of ideas suggested by the examiner report, and really an emphasis upon building cohesion across their response. So we're just going to concentrate on the middle column of this particular mark scheme. We're going to focus on level 3, which we know is the holy grail of grades 5 and above. So the main thing for me is to kind of just pick out some of the key phrasing that's within that level 3 descriptor. So the effective use of structural features. So what they really mean to say at this point is that we need to be thinking about the sequencing of that argument. But equally, more than just a discourse marker, are students making purposeful decisions within their structural choices? So I think it used to be the school of thought that you would get into level 3 way back when, I think when the adaptation of the mark scheme had been done and the new specification was brought out, that you could just vary a paragraph. Get in a one-line paragraph and you're good to go. But I think it's become far more sophisticated than that. Students need to be able to track the development of our ideas, but equally in the same way it's sort of paper 1 question 5, where you would introduce things like symbolism or motif to kind of communicate a gradual ascent or descent or a shift in tone. You would need to do something quite similar within paper 2 question 5. And I think we often forget that. So the real focus of this session is on just that, really, cohesive ties and the dexterity of them and how we could use them within our writing. So when we're thinking about the use of effective structural features, that could be everything from discourse markers to motif to the use of fixative metaphors, and just thinking about how we can incorporate these transferable phrases at different points in the response to really highlight to the examiner that there is a strong sense of cohesion in the response, but equally the students are making active choices when considering the structure of their response. So on this slide we have key bullet points taken from the Summer 2023 Exam Series Examiner Report, and there are a couple of things to kind of identify here that are pertinent maybe to our discussion on cohesion today. So for me, that sort of 4th bullet point down where it states structurally it is important to offer a coherent response to develop a view from start to end. This is the bullet point that really got me thinking about that distinction between whether or not I felt as though my students could write a good argument or whether or not they had a viewpoint on the topic. And I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm not too sure. I think, if I'm really honest, I think they could write a really good argument, but had they engaged in the topic. And I think some of those students, and you'll know the ones, especially within Year 11, that are your key amber 2.3, 3.1 students with low cultural capital, would they be able to get into that topic? Did they have enough awareness of the topic to be able to develop a viewpoint towards it and make that viewpoint convincing? I'm not too sure, and again that's kind of got me reflecting upon my own practice. But when we think about that, it is a simple case of ensuring that they have a really tight viewpoint, that we've given them the skills to build a viewpoint to any given statement, and that they're able to track the development of that. And there are some brilliant examples and some resources in the recipe book that really support students in doing so, such as universal solutions, and we'll talk about them quite widely in the session. Another thing that got me thinking about it as well is how routinely we model with students. I think we always model the planning process with them, but now I'm kind of in the mind frame where I'm thinking that I need to demonstrate how I can manipulate the structure over and over again. So I'm always approaching the next statement through a new lens. So if we've looked at snow, the next topic has to be something quite different to help broaden our students' understanding of wider issues of current affairs, and be able to demonstrate to them that we can manipulate the structure to suit that particular topic and to make sure that they have a voice when discussing that topic as well. You can see there in red that the key points here made by the examiner was about the overuse of picture this and imagine this, and making sure that we avoid prescriptive approaches. And I think what we're trying to suggest here is that students need to come prepared. They need to understand how to organise their writing, and that's really important. We're not saying that it's a free-for-all in the exam room, you know, that they've been given a blank page and they have to do something with that within 45 minutes, and that's really hard. So they need some support, they need some structure, but equally we need to give them the flexibility of adapting their approach to suit the needs of that particular topic. So I think over modelling and demonstrating there is more than one way to present that idea. So it doesn't always need to be the case that we refer to imagine this. It could be place yourself in those shoes, or it could be that we open our paragraph with a triplet of rhetorical questions, or we start with an extended metaphor, just to vary the approach. And I think what we'll find is that students will have a voice, but equally they'll have confidence in their writing because they've been exposed to so many different models and approaches to that particular topic. So cohesion, in short, it is the glue that keeps our words together. You know, that sounds really, really corny, but in its simplest terms, cohesion refers to how ideas are sequenced and in the kind of order, whether that's a linear order or not. The cohesion is how these particular ideas that we're presenting are sequenced or linked together. And it is the glue that holds everything together. So a cohesion could be achieved by simply using a discourse marker. So you could say, furthermore, however, something as simple as that just signals the progression of their argument. Or it could be as complex as a motif. And you'll notice in the recipe books, there's some really good examples of how to develop a musical motif, and I know there are students doing that currently, talking about how they've been conducted to do something, or the symphony of, and that's a really nice way of generating that cohesion across the response. But the main objective, I think, for our students is to ensure that there is a clear line of argument, that they can move from A to B, and that argument is referred to and checked upon routinely. And that's a really hard skill for our students who, let's be honest, don't routinely edit their work or go back to it and make amendments. So asking them to really think about how they're going to ensure that the idea that they initiated at the beginning of the response is being referred to consistently throughout it and concluded upon at the end. And that's something that we could work upon within their planning. So this is just one approach to planning that you could use with your Year 10 or Year 11 students. So just to explain it, going from the very beginning, the first thing that I would do is I would get the students to read the statement and just tell me in their own layman's terms, what do they think, feel or believe about this statement? So where do they land on it? And it could be something really banal and really, really monotonous, and that's actually brilliant. So it could be that they find education boring. Just start off with a viewpoint so they know that immediately they have a negative attitude towards that statement. And then the next thing I would ask them to do is, well, that's what your viewpoint is, but there's got to be something beneath the idea that school is boring, for instance. So we would ask them or encourage them to develop a moral echo. And again, when we think about cohesion, this moral echo is something that resonates across their response. So typically it's a phrase or a statement that's repeated at different stages in the response as a reminder to the reader that this is the crux, this is the real issue that sits behind this statement. And I know I've spoken to you in the Amuse Bouche for Year 10, where we talked about underpinning the concept behind the statement. This is a very similar idea. So it could be that school is boring, but it's boring due to a societal fear of change. So society has been too fearful to change the education system and it's stuck in the dark ages. That is a much better viewpoint, a more developed viewpoint that encompasses not just their personal view on the issue, but equally a societal view. And it has more of a punch rather than simply saying that school is boring, because they can roll it out of steam. But if you say that actually the reason behind this tedious education system is because of our fear for change, and that's why we haven't evolved as a society. So once we've established that, we've got a really clear viewpoint, we now need the words. So you can see sort of highlighted in the pink box, education, and students are asked to build a semantic field around education. And then it could be that as part of your questioning, you're trying to tease out why they've selected that word, what particular facet of education is responsible for that word, for instance. And then we would ask them to think about, well, what would be your solution? So if we could improve the education system using our universal solutions, what would that mean for society? So yes, you decided that this is a system that you find boring. The wider issue is societal fear. These are the words that you would use to describe it. It's oppressive, you feel captive, shackled, imprisoned within school. But if we improved it, it would mean that there are more opportunities, more life chances for young people, lower employment, more successful, more productive population. We are healthier and there's less pressure on mental health services. And I would definitely make sure that we're encouraging students to refer back to those universal solutions, because when we have a cohort of students that have low cultural capital, that really struggle to think about a line of argument, those solutions are a really useful way in, and then increased exposure to them means that the students will be able to kind of link them to any given statement. So once they've gone through all of the universal solutions, they can kind of cherry pick the ones that they feel are most applicable. So imagine all of that's the groundwork. They're now in the position to look at the past, the present and the future as being their line of argument, their structure. And I have that little domino effect at the top, and it's to remind students that it should be this really clear, consistent line of dominoes that they knock down one by one. It shouldn't stop, it should just continue on, because they've initiated their issue, they've talked about society's concern, and so that moral echo has to be responded to in every single paragraph. So the past, it used to be that we talked about the past as almost being the Victorian ages, and sometimes that's really difficult for students to shoehorn in. What I found to be more successful at the moment is when we encourage our students to look back at their childhood. So what aspect of their childhood, when was it really good? So in this particular case, it would be primary school, and they would perhaps at this point list all the things about primary school that were infinitely better than secondary school, and then provide a kind of utopian positive semantic field to describe them. Then the present would be quite easy. It would get them thinking about the problem that exists in society currently, like why is it that school is so bad. You would then get them to think about different perspectives at this point. So do you have an expert in education, maybe an MP, or is there someone that would hold an alternative opinion to yours? And then the future should be the call to arms, and that's when you bring in those universal solutions. So I think modelling this to students, doing this routinely with them until they're able to do it independently, will give them all the things that they need to be able to write a really good response to this question. So our first example of how to develop cohesion, this is moral resonance, and it's something that you would encourage students to consider when they're looking at their literature text. You would ask them to talk about what the writer thinks, feels or believes. So in this case, they are the writer now, so they need to be able to do that. And what I've done is I've extended it even further by incorporating extended metaphor. So if I felt as though that the real issue within society is ignorance, the reason why we have a poor education system is because of our ignorance towards it, I would therefore turn ignorance into a disease. It's something that plagues society. So you can see in my examples here, I'm going to use a statement that our lack of funding for outdoor school events and forest schools is symptomatic of society's ignorance. So again, I'm using that keyword taken from extended metaphor of disease, and I'm linking it to ignorance again. Then I have children today are the unfortunate casualties of a limited and ignorant view on education. So again, using that extended metaphor of disease, but again, repeating the word ignorance. And I think if you imagine the first one would pop up in the opening section, you might talk about in the present section it being symptomatic, and then you could perhaps use that as part of your perspectives when you talk about an expert in the field that might want to weigh in on their viewpoint on education. But again, just developing that moral echo, making it far more sophisticated than simply just repeating the same phrase over and over again, and trying to extend that even further. And it has the added benefit of ensuring that if we talked about the problem's disease throughout the response and we come to the solution in the future section, we can transfer that into the cure and the antidote, and you've got that really nice seamless link, kind of transference of shift in tone, that will enable students to pick up marks of cohesion there as well. So it can be as simplistic cohesive tie just by simply repeating it, but you could really encourage the students to apply their extended metaphor to the issue, and they'll have a far more sophisticated cohesive tie within their response. So just a quick model to demonstrate how the moral echo works, and how we include that extended metaphor of disease. I've got an example here from a question on snow and the perils of that snow. So you can see here that I've got a colour code in the crafting our paragraphs. These are just key stems for key Amber students really that might need that bit of support when they're constructing their paragraph. You can see the moral echo is referred to in that highlighted green. So you've got selfishness, the problem that plaguing society isn't the snow, but our reaction to it. So immediately we've got that moral echo being referred to, and then we've got the extended metaphor of snow. And then further down the paragraph, it states, our community today have become infected. So again, that extended metaphor of disease by their own selfish myopia. So you can see how that moral echo and the extension of the echo to include that disease or extended metaphor of disease really helps support the students in linking to their viewpoint. So that viewpoint that they initiate at the very beginning of their response is just constantly referred back to, and again developing that line of argument all the way through. But equally, you could swap out disease and include the extended metaphor of conflict or sea or storm, and I would encourage you to model that with the students so they've got that as part of their arsenal really, and they can use that within their exam. But I think the moral echo or developing extended metaphor throughout the response is a really quick way of demonstrating quite a complex cohesive tie, and to demonstrate to the examiner that they are using a wide range of structural features. So that's it for our session on creating a line of argument. I hope it's been useful and some food for thought around how we develop cohesion for our students. Again, if there's anything that you want to kind of just question or raise your link director, please do so and I'd be happy to help.